I watched the film Heathers the other day, and as a result I've sort of accidentally given myself 80s hair, so we've leaned into it, frosted eyeshadow and all. This is going to be a slightly strange sort of video because this project started out as one thing and ended up as something completely different. Hello and welcome back to Retro Claude, and in this video I'm really living up to the retro part of this channel's name because we are making a 1970s pinafore dress. I began this project all the way back in February, and it was a lovely change to return to the 20th century, having just completed that mammoth 1820s project. But as often happens, things didn't exactly go to plan, and in fact this outfit took on a whole new lease of life. What started as an everyday retro outfit has become my contribution to this historical Disney costume trend that is currently sweeping CosTube. But I'll explain more about that as we get to it. To begin, the pattern I'm using is Style 5354. And it's got these beautiful style lines with this yoke and this very full skirt. The description said it should have a raised waistline, but as I'm already very short in the torso, that wasn't really going to work for me, so I ended up keeping the waistline at about my natural level. In terms of fabric for this project, one of the things I'm trying to do this year is use up a little more of the fabric in my stash. So for this dress, I'm using a wool blend gabardine that I originally bought for my A-level textiles project. Now, as it was offcuts from another project, I wasn't sure there was going to be enough to make the whole dress. So I decided to incorporate this real wool check for the facings and the belt. I had intended to add a decorative band around the bottom in this wool as well, but I decided against that in the end, as you will see. I got the wool from a charity de-stash event that I once went to in a village hall, but I could tell it was real wool because it's pretty badly moth-eaten. Before I could start cutting out, I tacked around the holes with a bright coloured thread to make sure I avoided them when pinning on my pattern pieces. A few of the pattern pieces were already cut out, but a few needed cutting to size, so I started to do that before laying and pinning them out on the fabric. As I was trying to work mostly from stash for this project, I checked my threads to see if I had anything that would match. I had these 4 green threads for the overlocking, which weren't an exact colour match, but would do. But for the sewing, it turns out I had this thread from when I made my green 1940s dress, which was a pretty good match. I chalked in all my sewing lines and transferred all the balance marks and notches. I then changed the threads on my overlocker, snipping the old threads, tying on the green ones, and then pulling the threads through. This never works perfectly for me, so I did have to go in and thread up the underlooper properly. I took the time to clean out the dust from Little Dorrit while I was there. My overlocker has this little arm that helps thread it up, but it only works if everything is perfectly aligned, which takes a bit of fiddling. With the overlocker finally threaded up, I could begin overlocking around the raw edges of all my pattern pieces. For the curved edges of these facings, I snipped into the curves so that I could pull them flat as I ran them through the machine. It just makes the whole process a little easier. I neatened all my overlocker threads by threading them back on themselves with a darning needle. Then I could begin on the basic construction of the bodice. As usual, first came the darts. In this case, I had 6 darts, 2 back neck, 2 back waist, and 2 front waist. I left the long tails of thread so that I could tie off the point of the dart, making it lovely and crisp. Then press them all over a tailor's ham. For the yoke, I pressed up the seam allowances as described in the instructions. The front piece is then overlapped, matching the sewing lines, then tacked in place. I didn't bother top stitching it just yet as I needed to do a fitting, and I also realised that I wanted to make this yoke piece out of the wool, not the gabardine. I machined one side seam and the shoulder seams, then tacked in the sewing line for the other side seam so I could pin the remaining side seam for a fitting. Much easier than having to teach someone else how to pin up the back, although this still can be a little awkward. The fit of the bodice was, well, bad. It was bad, particularly at the back. This pattern also had ridiculously high and pointy darts, which is kind of characteristic of the 70s, but isn't really a look I want to go for. It was also too small at the waist, so I began by letting out the darts and repinning them in. I also did a kind of weird alteration on the back, which I will now do my best to try and explain. So I think it's just going to be easiest if I talk you through the alterations I've made. So to start with, I've let the darts out. This is 7mm, so we're looking at nearly 3 centimetres between the two darts. That's all for the front, but the back I've altered extensively. Now, you will remember that I pinned in a dart from the armhole this way towards the waist, and what I've done is essentially, if this was a proper toile and I was doing a fitting, I would have smoothed that out into the side seam, but can't do that myself on my own back, so I took it off, I put it on the stand and I pinched in roughly how much I thought I needed to take out, and then I refitted it and it looked better. So what I've done is I've actually measured how much I pinched out in the dart and I've taken it out of the side seam here. As a result, we've got a curved, weird-looking side seam, but then again, I have a curved, weird-looking back. So I've done that on both sides. I also raised the shoulder up about 2 centimetres. I will probably have to lower the neckline as a result of that. Maybe not, it kind of looked fine. I'll have to check the footage and see what I think. But yeah, so I'm going to raise up the shoulder, and then that took out some of that horizontal puckering, because that indicates it's too long, but it was also bunching up a little bit like that across the back, which indicates it's too wide. So hopefully this will do the trick. I've just got to sew it now and retry it on and see how I feel about it. Having completed those alterations, I was much happier with the fit, although I did go in and tweak it some more later. But for now, I just cracked on with the construction of the skirt. Okay, so this quick and easy project has turned out into really quite a nightmare, particularly in terms of fit. So this pattern is a 34-inch bust, and I usually make a 36-inch bust, but when I compared it to my custom bodice block, they were about the same size, and we all know Big Four patterns, infamous for their ease, vintage or otherwise. However, this, it turns out, is one of these style patterns, and it seems the ease wasn't so bad as I was anticipating. So I didn't have as much fitting room as I thought I would. I have been able to get the back looking somewhat decent. I've tacked the zipper in for now, so it will be fractionally snugger than this, because obviously the zipper's it's just basted in, so it's gaping a bit. But it is snug. To get the back to lay flat, I've had to really tighten the front, and I can't really let the front out anymore. I've let the darts out. I mean, I can possibly there's only 1.5 centimetres in, so I could possibly let a little bit out at the front. But yeah, it's just turned into a bit of a nightmare, really. I don't know if you can see, hang on, the camera's probably a bit high. The lighting probably isn't quite good enough, but the side seam tilts backwards quite dramatically as a result of me doing my back alteration. So I could, you know, really, I needed to do a proper toile, but I didn't, because this was supposed to be a quick and easy project. This project has confirmed to me that if I want to carry on making clothes for myself, I need a custom dress form. Yes, I've padded this one to be about my size, and she's got my Rosie Huntington Whiteley for Marks and Spencer's bra on. But the shoulders and the back and the disparity across the front and the back in me, and you can see like in my natural posture, still this is too long in the waist. It's just been a bit of a mess really, and this is why I don't usually make my clothes this fitted, because anything this tight fitting is just a nightmare on me. I mean, it's possible, but I need somebody to fit the back, which obviously I don't have. So if I'm making clothes for myself, I need to fit the back. So I'm going to make a duct tape dress form. It's decided. I've even bought the duct tape. Yeah, so hopefully in the future that will solve some of these fitting issues. It's always the way, isn't it? The projects you think are going to be easy never are. So, I also, in my fitting palaver, like I didn't film any of making the skirt because I realised that having altered the darts, the skirt wouldn't be big enough. So I altered the skirt to make it bigger, and then it turned out I made it too big, so I had to take it in again, and I just didn't film any of that because I was so frustrated by that point. So in other news on this project, my Benina sewing machine, I can't remember if it was in this video that I said it or not, it might have been a different video, but it hasn't been serviced for 2 years, and it gave an almighty crunching noise the other day, and it hasn't been the same ever since. It just is grinding a bit, and I've cleaned it and oiled it, and it's not getting any better. So my instinct tells me I need to not sew on it until I can get it serviced, which could be several months because of coronavirus. So thankfully I have a backup sewing machine. This is a cheap £100 brother machine that I got from Argos, and I got it for the express purpose of taking on tour with me back in the days when I was well enough to work away from home on tour with a production. So it's very light. It's very bog standard, but it's quite reliable and does the job, so it should be fine. But, you know, it's just another thing, just another element to the drama of this project that was supposed to be quick and easy and simple. I also forgot in my fitting palaver that I had originally intended to make this yoke piece out of this contrast wool. So to kind of give it a bit more of a 70s flair, and I'm going to make a matching belt in this check as well. So I was going to do a hem detail as well, but no, I don't have the energy to do that now for this. My inspiration energy for this project was sucked out a long time ago. But the yoke, I think I don't mind going in and changing this because it's only the 3 seams, the top stitching and the facings, because oh gosh, of course when you do this many alterations and you've got this pattern has those continuous round the arm, round the back neckline facings. So having changed this seam and this seam extensively, that meant I had to do a lot of alterations on the facings as well. It's been a whole palaver. I'm already kind of fed up with it, but we're going to persevere and get this done. Because we're nearly there. Once I change the yoke, it's the zip, the facings and the hem. Oh, and make the belt. And then we should have a 1970s dress to add to my wardrobe. But I may never make a fitted dress again. I'm just going to wear smocks for the rest of my life. I began by unpicking and changing the yoke piece. The process was exactly the same, folding up the seam allowance, overlapping it with the front and then top stitching in place. Next I installed the zip, tacking the centre back opening shut, pressing it open and then centering the zip over the seam and tacking it in place. I ended up buying a brand new zip for this project, which is something I almost never do, but I have learnt my lesson from many a past project, faffing about with facings, that I should just buy a zip that's the right length. I then machined the zip in place using a zipper foot. Next, I stitched in the facings and clipped the seam allowances with pinking shears for ease of turning. Once turned and pressed, I herringboned the facing down to stop them flapping around. Next came the hem. For this skirt, which was basically a circle skirt, I used bias binding. As the skirt is quite short and full, it was highly likely that the inside of the skirt would be seen, so that's why I went for the binding. Unfortunately, it's not an exact colour match, but oh well. I machined the binding on, but then turned my attention to making the belt. For this, I used a length of Petersham ribbon as stiffening and cut a rectangle of the wool double the width, plus seam allowance. I machined the wool onto the Petersham, then trimmed down the seam allowance. As the wool was so thick, I ended up rolling the raw edges over the Petersham and top stitching it in place. I then folded the other half of the fabric over the Petersham and turned the seam allowance under before, again, top stitching it. Although the side with the folded raw edges was too bulky and my lighter weight machine couldn't handle it, so I ended up slip stitching the long edge of the belt instead. I then returned to the hem, pressing up the hem binding and then slip stitching it in place with an uneven slip stitch. I tried my best to only catch a few threads of the skirt fabric to keep the stitches as invisible as possible. The belt being quite thick and heavy, I decided to make a heftier thread loop than my usual crochet chain. Instead, I made several long stitches the width of the belt plus a little ease, and then buttonhole stitched over those long stitches. The only thing left to do was to join the shoulder seams. I did the facing seams by machine and then the main seam by hand, as the wool was much more prone to stretching than the gabardine. I also added the belt buckle, but I didn't seem to film that. So technically this dress is finished, but I'm not really very happy with it. It's just the fit isn't great. I could try and tweak it some more, but I don't love the finished dress enough to want to put the effort into making it better, if that makes sense. Or I didn't until I started to see a lot of these historical Disney costumes that are going on at the minute online on YouTube and on Instagram. And I don't really consider myself a Disney fan. I thoroughly enjoyed and watched the VHS tapes growing up, like a lot of people I think from my generation. But it's sort of something I associate with my childhood and I'm perfectly happy to leave it there. However, that being said, I couldn't help but love the absolute serendipity of the fact that this pattern is from 1973 and Robin Hood, which was one of my favourite Disney films as a kid, is also from 1973. And this is sort of greeny, Robin Hood-esque, so I think it's going to become a Robin Hood cosplay, I suppose. A historically accurate Robin Hood would probably be, whatever, 14th century, 15th century? When's the Magna Carta? Obviously, it's not going to be historically accurate for the 1400s, which is when I think Robin Hood was supposed to be alive. It's going to be historically accurate for the 70s. The only thing that I need, I think, to complete this outfit is a hat. And so in sort of a weird, historically anachronistic way, I'm going to make a 1930s hat to kind of get that very typical Robin Hood shape. I've got myself a red feather to stick in it. Been having an hour and ages about what colour Robin Hood's hat actually is, because in some pictures it looks brown, in some it looks green. It's not the same green as his little tunic, but it's not brown enough that it's like the fox fur colour. So I was trying to get a fabric to match, and I've just decided actually that I'm going to make the hat out of this fabric and sort of have it be a whole matching ensemble, because I've got some of that left. I've got some buckram. So hopefully with the addition of this little hat and turning this into a costume, I will feel a bit better about it at the end of the day. My camera's about to die, so I'm going to crack on and cut out the fabric for this hat. This 1930s hat pattern is based on one from a magazine that I found for free online. There's a link in the description. I scaled it up and cut first my wool main fabric, then my lining. This is just an acetate lining from my stash. I then cut my buckram. This is the buckram I use from Parkin. It's really tricky to cut buckram, and I don't recommend you use your best fabric scissors. I struggled quite a lot with this, but in the end I had my crown and my brim pieces. I sewed up the crown and brim sections in the wool and the buckram. Getting this under the machine was interesting, but I managed. I clipped the curves and pressed them open over a tailor's ham. I fitted the buckram inside the wool, but it ended up being a bit long, probably from my shoddy cutting earlier. I trimmed the buckram and then glued the wool in place inside the buckram. I used my little clips to hold the fabric in place while the glue dried completely. I then did a fitting and realised that the brim was too big for the crown, so I took in the buckram and wool layers for the brim. I realised I hadn't removed the seam allowance from the outside edge of the buckram piece, so I trimmed that down before joining the two layers of the brim fabric together along the outside edge. I graded down the seam allowance with pinking shears, pressed and turned that seam before slotting the buckram brim inside the two layers of wool. I top stitched around the edge of the brim as decoration and to reinforce the edge of the brim. Then I glued the fabric to the buckram at the inside edge, again using my clips to hold everything in place until it had dried. I then glued the crown onto the brim. This was fiddly and wasn't entirely secure, so I also stab stitched through all the layers from the right side. I then made up the crown lining before turning under the seam allowance at the bottom edge and slip stitching the lining in place. Again, this was very fiddly. Last but not least was the red feather. This is a pheasant feather, and so I don't have any ethical qualms about using it, as A, they are native birds to the UK and incredibly common, and B, are raised for meat as well as sport, so we're going to get killed anyway. I worked the feather through the loose weave of the wool and added a few stitches to make sure that it was held in place securely. All that was left to do was adjust the brim, and the Robin Hood costume was complete. Only, of course, I live in England, so as I went to do the reveal, it started to rain. There was a break in the weather just long enough for me to get a little footage of the finished ensemble. But I realised that I'd forgotten one incredibly important Robin Hood detail. No Robin Hood costume would be complete without a bow and arrow. Much better. I'm still not entirely sure I'm happy with the fit of this dress. The back is pretty good, but the front is still too tight in ways I don't think I'm going to be able to do anything about, and the darts are still weird and pointy in a very 70s way. I had intended to go to the woods and take some aesthetic Robin Hood footage, but I didn't have the energy, so you'll have to make do with these saplings instead. As a retro 70s dress and not a Robin Hood costume, I do quite like it. It's definitely my colours and I like the style. It's just the fit, which is disappointing. Okie dokie, so that's it. This project is complete. So it's cute, but I'm not really very pleased with it. It doesn't really fit great still. I have tried to improve it. I have changed the darts and stuff, but still not great. And it's one of those things, I always wonder how honest I should be about this sort of thing, but I always get loads of comments on my videos like, oh, I love it that you show us when it goes wrong. So this is for you, you know, you're not alone. I was able to improve the fit slightly. So it's gone from being uncomfortable to wear, like I'm not going to wear it at all, to snugger than I prefer, but I can get into it, you know. So, you know, that's an improvement. I think the thing with the fit, you can kind of see it here. It's just too small. It's just too small through the bust. And it's almost not actually like the cup size that's too small. It's the over bust and the under bust that are too small. And I was able to let the under bust out with the darts, so there's more room here, but obviously there's nothing I can do here to make it bigger. So, yep, just gonna have to live with that, I guess. Had I done a toile, I would have done a full bust adjustment and all that sort of stuff, but I didn't do a toile because this was supposed to be a quick project. For reference, I started this project straight away after Little Dorrit, so that was February, it's now May. But I am glad that I put it to one side and left it and turned it into this little Robin Hood costume with my little jaunty hat. It was just fun, you know, it became fun again. So as far as a Robin Hood costume goes, I don't know if it reads Robin Hood straight away. I think it actually reads a bit more Peter Pan, but I can't figure out if that's just because of my hair. I've kind of got short, boyish hair now, and Peter Pan's costume is pretty identical to Robin Hood's. They're sort of wearing medieval tunics. I mean, Peter Pan's just has the dagging. He's got a similar shaped hat, you know, all that sort of stuff. So it's multi-purpose. This could be Peter Pan or Robin Hood. I know that this Disney bounding thing is a thing that people like to do. It's not for me, really. I don't really want to go around looking like a Disney character in my everyday life, however subtle. And like the 70s nature of the dress, I'm not sure reads in everyday life. And I think that's just because I've changed my hair. You know, when I do vintage, I like to do authentic, you know, look like I've just stepped out of a magazine from that era. And of course, for the 70s, I'd need a perm. And that's not happening anytime soon, is it? So, yeah, so it's not the like historically accurate, authentic 70s that I would like to do, but it's still a cute dress and I'll probably wear it in the winter because it's a bit warm. Although it is raining today, so. I've got mixed feelings about wearing it though, because I do feel it makes me look very panto principal boy, and I realise that's a cultural reference that nobody is going to get apart from British people. But if you're British, and you'll know what I mean, I'm sure, like thigh slapping. Oh no, it isn't. You know, it's that sort of thing. So I think we'll have to file all this rambling under mixed feelings. Oh, I haven't even talked about the hat yet. So this hat pattern was available for free online, and you could also buy a PDF to download. I'm really glad I didn't pay for it because it's supposed to be a 30s sort of tilt sports topper. But if I wear it tilted forward like a 30s hat's supposed to, it looks ridiculous. I look like I've got a milk carton on my head. Like, it's so weird. And I kept like trying to position it. I was sending photos to my friends, like, what is up with this hat? I was sure I drafted the pattern correctly. You know, it's not that I scaled it up wrong or anything. It just is not a cool 30s hat. It's too square and boxy. So I don't know if I'll get any wear out of this as a 30s hat, which I kind of was hoping. It's gonna have to just be my Robin Hood hat, but you know, that's fine, I guess. Sometimes it's just good to do things for a little bit of fun, and I suppose the hat will have to be one of those. I can always lend it out to people, I suppose, as well. I think that's about it. I'm really glad I jumped on the bandwagon here and got involved in this historical Disney thing. It's something I would never normally do, so it was nice to be involved and sort of give this dress a new life, because I was disappointed with it and all of that. So I have enjoyed this project. I don't know if I'll do another one of these. I don't think Disney content is going to become a regular thing on this channel. I think that's all I've got to say. So thank you very much for watching.